Hey guys, tonight we're wandering into the baffling, biscuit-dunked world of the Victorian era. A time when people wore too many hats, died of the sniffles, and, crucially, ate things for health that would make your modern nutritionist break out in hives. Yes, tonight's episode is all about food that Victorians genuinely believed could heal you, cure you, or at least keep you out of the grave until you'd finished your third helping of boiled mutton. Spoiler: most of these foods were about as medicinal as a scented candle at a sewage treatment plant. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you actually enjoy what I do here. Comment below with the weirdest food remedy your family ever made you try. Bonus points if it involved brandy, baking soda, or anything that should legally be classified as a dessert. Now, dim those lights. Switch on a fan for that nostalgic Victorian white noise. Distant coughing, maybe a hoarse clip-clopping. Bye, and get comfortable. Wiggle your toes and tuck yourself in. No leeches or warm gin required. Let's get curious for a second. Have you ever wondered what it feels like to be force-fed cod liver oil by someone who thinks a cold bath is the solution to heartbreak? Have you ever asked yourself if a pie could double as a painkiller? Could you survive a day being treated for mild anxiety with 3 pints of beef tea and a mustard plaster sandwich? Would you trust your life to a foodstuff that looks and tastes like boiled wallpaper paste? Well, congratulations. You've just woken up in London, 1863. You're pale, you're underpaid, your doctor is wearing a top hat indoors, and your medicine cabinet looks suspiciously like your pantry. Welcome to the golden age of eating your way to the grave, one medicinal meal at a time. It's morning, and you're not feeling your best, which means it's time for the most famous medicine of the Victorian age. Gruel. Not quite. Porridge. Not quite sadness. This watery oat soup is prescribed for everything from broken legs to mild ennui. Your doctor swears by it. Your stomach, however, would rather starve. Let's set the scene. You've woken up in a narrow iron bed, in a room that smells faintly of damp plaster, mothballs, and the ghost of a long-forgotten lavender sachet. There's a draft coming through the window that no one remembers opening. Every joint aches. The air is filled with the gentle clatter of someone else's spoon, and the occasional encouraging cough from the next bed over. The nurse. Starched apron. Shoes made for stealth. Appears by your side. She's carrying a bowl. She's always carrying a bowl. What's in the bowl? Gruel. You know this because gruel is the only food that manages to look worse the closer you get to it. It's thin, almost translucent, with a kind of surface shimmer that suggests someone whispered the word oat into boiling water and hoped for the best. If you're lucky, there might be a stray lump for texture, a surprise oat, a rogue grain of rice, or the rare but exciting bit of unmelted sugar. Victorian doctors believed gruel was a miracle cure, gentle on the stomach, full of imaginary nutrients, and incapable of exciting the patient into anything as dangerous as enthusiasm. If you were ill, exhausted, recovering from surgery, or simply in need of being kept quiet, gruel was your culinary fate. It was the breakfast of the sick room, the lunch of the convalescent, and occasionally the midnight snack of those who'd run afoul of Victorian plumbing. But here's the fun part. Gruel isn't just food, it's a vibe. Eating gruel is the gastronomic equivalent of being gently shushed. It's what you're given when life wants to remind you that you're not in charge anymore. You don't even get to choose the temperature. It arrives lukewarm. The universal setting for food designed to neither comfort nor offend. The spoon is heavy. The bowl is panned, chipped, and you are expected to eat every drop, if only so the nurse can tick a box on her rounds sheet. The taste? Imagine sadness, filtered through a tea towel, then diluted. It's bland, with just enough starch to remind you you're alive. and just enough warmth to suggest that someone, somewhere, meant well. Every mouthful is a meditation on humility. If you close your eyes and concentrate, you might taste a faint hint of oat, or perhaps just the memory of last week's porridge. Sometimes they stir in milk, but don't get excited. It's skimmed off the top and stretched with water until it tastes of nothing at all. And yet, this was medicine. Victorian mothers swore by it. Doctors prescribed it. Invalids endured it day after day, in the hope that each bland spoonful was slowly reconstructing their shattered health. There were variations. Arrowroot gruel for delicate stomachs, barley gruel for fever, sago gruel for people who'd angered a nurse in a past life. The one thing they had in common? None of them tasted like anything you'd willingly eat if you were well. In modern terms, imagine if your doctor handed you a glass of warm, unflavored almond milk and told you it would fix your migraines, back pain, and existential dread. That's gruel. It's self-care. Victorian edition, minimal effort, maximum boredom. The real kicker? If you survived your illness, it was assumed the gruel had worked. If you didn't, well, at least you hadn't died on a full stomach. It was win-win, as long as you defined win loosely. The sickroom gruel wasn't just food, it was a rite of passage. A gentle, soggy reminder that in the Victorian era, hope and healing sometimes came disguised as disappointment in a bowl. So as you close your eyes tonight, take comfort in knowing that your breakfast tomorrow probably won't require a prescription. And if it does, may it at least have flavor. Feeling faint, anxious, slightly dead? Victorians recommend beef, tea, hot water, poured over meat scraps, strained and declared a restorative. It's soup, but with all the flavor and joy carefully removed. Think of it as the Red Bull of its era, minus the wings, and plus a whiff of boiled cow. Let's set the table. It's mid-morning. You're in a gloomy bedroom that's part sickroom, part museum for mismatched wallpaper. You've spent the night tossing and turning, serenaded by the hacking cough of your roommate and the comforting drip, drip, drip of rain leaking through the ceiling. Sunlight finally pries its way through the grime on the glass, and the housemaid appears at your bedside, cradling a delicate teacup filled with, well, technically, it's tea. But before you get excited, let's manage some expectations. This isn't the sort of beefy beverage you'd get at a fancy gastropub or in one of those bougie bone broth cafes on Instagram. No, this is beef tea in the Victorian sense, water that once met a cow. Its main ingredients are hot water, scraps of beef that weren't good enough for actual stew, and a level of optimism that borders on reckless. In the Victorian mind, beef tea was not just food. It was the answer to everything. Got a fever? Beef tea? Broke your leg? Beef tea. Grieving the loss of your fifth cousin twice removed? Beef tea. Extra strong. If you were feeling nervous, which covered everything from actual anxiety to the general sense of existential dread that comes with living in the 19th century, the solution was a restorative cup of this meaty infusion. It was so highly regarded that it often turned up on the menu at hospitals, orphanages, and even the finest convalescent homes, served with a seriousness that suggested you were about to experience a minor miracle. But what did beef tea actually taste like? Imagine rainwater strained through a sandwich. There's the faintest memory of meat, as if a roast beef had strolled past the pot, waved hello, and kept walking. There's no salt, no vegetables, and absolutely nothing as exciting as a bay leaf. It's clear, watery, and somehow manages to be both oily and thin at the same time. You take a sip and feel well, not so much energized as slightly confused. Are you nourished? Are you being pranked? Only time, and several more teacups, will tell. it gets better. According to Victorian doctors, beef tea didn't just restore the body, it soothed the soul. It was served to the weak, the weary, and anyone the doctor declared delicate. If you were especially sick, you might be allowed an egg beaten in for protein or a splash of sherry for the nerves, which, if we're honest, was probably the most restorative part. People wrote earnest letters to the Times debating whether beef tea should be prepared by boiling or simmering, and whether it was permissible to add pepper, or if that was risking certain death by overstimulation. Still, beef tea wasn't all bad. It was gentle on the stomach and easy to swallow, which made it perfect for the recently operated, the chronically ill, and anyone whose appetite had fled at the sight of Victorian cooking. It also had the distinct advantage of being difficult to choke on, unless you were particularly startled by the odd bit of floating fat. And let's talk portion size. The serving was always tiny, just a dainty teacup, never a mug. Too much beef tea was apparently a moral hazard, possibly leading to wild outbursts of energy, or, worse, mild optimism. In the end, beef tea was less about healing and more about reassurance. You sipped it while friends patted your hand, nurses fluffed your pillows, and everyone agreed you'd be right as rain in no time as long as you kept drinking this faintly bovine water. So next time you reach for an energy drink, spare a thought for the Victorians, who faced their problems armed only with beef tea and a prayer. May your own restorative beverages at least taste of something other than the ghost of lunch. Your mother is coming at you with a pamplemousse. May your own restorative beverages at least taste of something other than the ghost of lunch. Spoon and a look of pure determination. Cod liver oil, the original childhood trauma in a bottle, claimed to cure everything from rickets to moral failings. It tastes like something wrung out of a fisherman's sock. You know what's coming before the bottle even appears. There's that ominous glug-glug sound, the oily sheen on the spoon, and the grim set of your mother's jaw. She's not here to negotiate. In the Victorian home, cod liver oil was a rite of passage, a test of strength, obedience, and gag reflex all at once. Your siblings are watching from a safe distance. One is holding their nose. The other is quietly praying for your soul. You have no escape. The oil itself is a wonder of modern misery. It shimmers in the light, golden and menacing, with a texture somewhere between salad dressing and engine lubricant. Victorians believed this magical elixir was the answer to every childhood woe. Cough, cod liver oil. Night terrors, cod liver oil. Fear of the dark, bedwetting, or general lack of enthusiasm for Latin homework. You guessed it, cod liver oil. Doctors swore it built bones, sharpened minds, and kept the grim reaper at bay, one spoonful at a time. The moment of truth arrives. You pinch your nose. You try to think of anything else, puppies, birthday cake, your own funeral, anything but the sensation creeping toward your lips. And then it hits. The taste is not so much fishy as existential. It's the flavor of regret. It's what you imagine the bottom of the sea tastes like, with an afterburn of kelp and low tide. It coats your tongue, slides down your throat, and lingers in your soul. You can feel your ancestors wincing in solidarity. Victorian mothers insisted it was for your own good. After all, cod liver oil was the closest thing they had to a multivitamin. Rich in vitamins A and D, not that anyone had ever heard of those yet, it was prescribed for weak bones, soft teeth, and the mysterious disease called rickets, which seemed to attack every child with the audacity to be poor, pale, and slightly pigeon-toed. In winter, when the sun abandoned London for months, cod liver oil became a household staple, a little bottle of bottled sunshine, if sunshine also made you want to cry. But the benefits, you're told, are miraculous. It'll put roses in your cheeks, your mother says, wiping your chin. It'll keep your legs strong, your grandmother insists, from the comfort of her knitting chair. No one mentions the side effects, The burps, the repeating taste, the urge to write a strongly worded letter to the Norwegian fishing industry. For some families, cod liver oil was more than a medicine. It was an act of devotion. The ritual was sacred. Warm the bottle to make it pour, not to improve the taste. Nothing could. Fetch the special spoon, brace for complaints, ignore all protests. Some parents tried to mask the flavor with orange juice or a crust of bread. Others believed in swift justice. A quick swallow, a brisk walk, and an extra prayer for endurance. And just when you thought it couldn't get worse, you learned that cod liver oil wasn't just for children. Adults, too, were prescribed a daily spoonful for ailments ranging from joint pain to low spirits. It was the universal cure, the panacea, the one-size-fits-none solution for every ill, physical, mental, or moral. Even the family dog wasn't safe. Some Victorians dosed their pets in the hope of shiny coats and sturdy paws. Yet, the legend of cod liver oil endures. It's still whispered about by grandparents, invoked by modern wellness influencers, and quietly collecting dust in the back of your parents' medicine cabinet. Maybe the real miracle isn't that cod liver oil cured anything, but that generations survived it, more or less intact. So tonight, as you tuck yourself in, free from the tyranny of fish-based medicine, remember, if you survived cod liver oil, you can survive anything. And your teeth are probably just fine. Victorians believed that stewed quince, preferably cold and slimy, could lower a fever and soothe a sore throat. Never mind actual medicine, just mash some mystery fruit, add sugar, and pray. Bonus points if it comes in a jar your grandmother can't open. Let's set the scene. You're burning up, cheeks flushed, hair plastered to your forehead. The wallpaper in your bedroom starting to take on wobbly, psychedelic patterns. Your mother is at your side with a bowl of something that looks like it was recently scooped out of a pond. It's stewed quince, a fruit you've only ever seen in the company of overachieving botanists and Victorian recipe books. You ask, what exactly is a quince? But your mother ignores you. She's too busy scraping the last bits out of a jar that's been stuck shut since 1843. The smell hits first. Sharp, sweet, a little medicinal. Like applesauce with ambition and a slight undertone of cough syrup. You're not sure whether you're supposed to eat it or apply it directly to your forehead. Your grandmother, who has opinions about everything, insists on the former. When I was a girl, we took quince for everything, she says, ladling a quivering spoonful into your mouth. Fever, sore throats, heartbreak, and that time your uncle saw a ghost. Victorian medical logic was clear. Actual medicine was suspect and probably dangerous. But anything in a jam jar was basically a miracle. Quince was the superfood of the era. It didn't matter that it was nearly impossible to eat raw, that it had to be stewed for hours to become even remotely edible, or that it looked and felt like the ghost of a fruit salad. If you had a fever, you got quince. If you had a cough, you got more quince, this time with extra sugar to make it go down. If you didn't have either, you still got quince, just in case the universe was planning something. The theory was that quince, being both rare and unpleasant, must therefore be powerful. Victorians loved a challenge, and nothing says healing like a fruit that fights you every step of the way. A good batch of stewed quince could stand up by itself on a spoon, an achievement the family would discuss for weeks. The texture was a cross between jelly, applesauce, and the sort of slime you'd expect to find under your fridge during spring cleaning. It wobbled. It glistened. It clung to your tongue with the desperate determination of an unwanted house guest. As you choke down another spoonful, your mother beams with pride. She assures you the fever will break, the sore throat will fade, and you might even sleep through the night, if only you can finish your bowl of homemade, overcooked optimism. You notice that the spoon she's using looks suspiciously like the one you saw last week in the medicine cabinet. You decide not to ask. Victorian quinces weren't just for the sick, though. They made regular appearances at picnics, holiday feasts, and any social event where someone wanted to show off their prowess with boiling sugar. There were quince candies, quince jellies, quince syrups for cocktails, and, in moments of desperation, quince wine. Each household had its own secret recipe, usually involving more sugar than fruit and a level of patience that bordered on the superhuman. Of course, the actual science behind quince as a fever cure was, let's say, optimistic. The real effect was probably due to sugar, hydration, and the placebo power of eating something that looked like it might be illegal. But for Victorians, it was all about tradition. If your mother, your grandmother, and your grandmother's grandmother swore by stewed quince, who were you to question it? Besides, you were too busy trying to swallow. By morning, your fever breaks or it doesn't. Either way, you've been thoroughly dosed with fruit, sugar, and family lore. Congratulations. You've survived another Victorian fever. Thanks to the healing power of mystery jam. Modern medicine might offer more, but it'll never come with a silver spoon and a story about your uncle's ghost. If you thought gelatin was just for dessert, think again. In Victorian England, boiled calf's feet were transformed into a quivering, translucent health food, perfect for invalids, small children, and anyone who'd given up hope of chewing. Picture this: you're sick, your teeth hurt, or you're simply feeling a bit fragile. Perhaps you haven't chewed anything since Queen Victoria herself was in short pants. Enter the housekeeper, bearing a bowl of something that looks less like food and more like a science experiment. It's not ice, it's not soup, and it's definitely not pudding. Not in the comforting sense. No, this is jellied calf's foot, a Victorian staple so wobbly it seems to defy the laws of both physics and good taste. The process is simple, if a little horrifying. Take a calf's foot, yes, the actual foot, with all the connective bits that never got a starring role at the butcher's counter. Boil it for hours, skim off whatever floats to the top, never ask questions. Strain out the bones and tendons, add a bit of lemon peel or sugar if you're feeling extravagant, then pour it into a mold, wait for it to cool and set, and voila! You have a bowl of translucent wobble, trembling with every footstep and quivering in the breeze. It's the sort of food that looks like it might get up and leave if you stare at it too long. Victorian doctors adored it. They praised its restorative powers, insisting that jellied calf's foot was just the thing for patients who couldn't handle solid fare or, frankly, any excitement at all. It was prescribed for anyone recovering from surgery, suffering a fever, or simply convalescing from nervous exhaustion, which, in the 19th century, was basically everyone by Wednesday. If you had a pulse and a vague sense of disappointment, jellied calf's foot was on the menu. And so there you sit, spoon in hand, faced with a wobbly, glistening dome of medicinal goo. The taste is, well, it's subtle. Mostly it tastes like history. There's a faint beefiness, a whisper of lemon, and a lingering suspicion that this is what ghosts eat when they want to feel alive. The texture is its own adventure. One moment it's melting on your tongue. The next it's sticking to the roof of your mouth, determined to stay until you admit defeat. But for Victorians, this was peak medicine. The logic went like this. If the calf's foot was full of natural jelly, and jelly was necessary for your bones and joints, then eating the stuff must surely knit you back together. Why settle for rest and fluids when you could mainline collagen Victorian style? It's good for you, they insisted, doling out slabs of wobble to everyone from ailing grandmothers to teething toddlers. There's even evidence that some Victorian beauty experts believed a regular diet of calf's foot jelly would keep your skin smooth, your hair shiny, and your complexion bright. A sort of Botox in a bowl, but with more chewing and less dignity. Of course, no one actually looked forward to it. Jellied calf's foot was less a treat and more a test of willpower. If you managed to finish your bowl, you earned the right to lie dramatically on the fainting couch and complain about it for the rest of the week. The rest of the family watched from a safe distance, pretending to be supportive while quietly praying not to catch whatever you had. Nowadays, you'd be hard-pressed to find anyone outside a Victorian cosplay convention eating jellied calf's foot for their health. But for the Victorians, it was part medicine, part ordeal, and entirely unforgettable. So next time you see Jell-O in your fridge, remember, it could be worse. It could still be trembling. Centuries later, with the memory of a calf's foot and the echo of a doctor's optimism. Arrowroot was basically the original gluten-free trend, except Victorians didn't eat it for fun. They ate these bland, chalky biscuits to settle the stomach and, possibly, to test their will to live. Let's set the scene. You're in the parlor. The clock is ticking just a bit too loudly, and you haven't kept down a meal in days. Enter the family doctor, looking stern and a little too enthusiastic for someone about to prescribe what is essentially cardboard in biscuit form. He announces, "What you need is arrowroot." There's a rustle of concern from your relatives. Your mother looks resigned. Your stomach quietly prepares for disappointment. The arrowroot biscuit is an object lesson in the Victorian obsession with blandness. The logic went like this. The more flavorless a food, the more curative its powers. Arrowroot, a powder made from tropical tubers, was the ultimate anti-indulgence. It was gluten-free, fat-free, joy-free, and, if you believed the advertisements, capable of curing indigestion, diarrhea, and all manner of mysterious Victorian bellyaches. In reality, it was most effective at making you wonder what you'd done to deserve this. You take a biscuit. It's pale, dry, and crumbles if you look at it too aggressively. The first bite is a challenge. The texture is somewhere between schoolroom chalk and the sawdust on a butcher's floor. The taste is theoretical. It's as if someone baked the idea of food, then forgot to add any actual ingredients. You chew and chew and chew until your jaw is as tired as your spirit. Victorian mothers swore by these biscuits. They fed them to children with weak constitutions, to invalids recovering from mysterious fevers, and to grown men brought low by nothing more than a spicy meat pie. Arrowroot biscuits were the go-to remedy for anyone who couldn't keep down normal food, or, let's be honest, anyone whose doctor was secretly trying to discourage snacking between meals. If you managed to eat two, you were either on the mend or ready for sainthood. The best thing you could say about arrowroot biscuits was that they stayed down. This was their main selling point, shouted from the rooftops by desperate Victorian parents and unlicensed apothecaries. In an age before antacids or probiotics, just keeping your food where you put it was considered a medical triumph. Arrowroot biscuits were the edible equivalent of taking a vow of silence. Nothing exciting, nothing spicy, just quiet, bland reassurance that things would eventually improve. It didn't stop at biscuits. Arrowroot was turned into puddings, pap, and gruels, any soft beige substance that could be spooned into a reluctant patient. If you were really unlucky, you got arrowroot mixed with milk and water, heated until it formed a paste, then left to cool until it reached the consistency of wet drywall. Some households tried to spice things up with a touch of lemon zest or a sprinkle of sugar, but too much flavor defeated the purpose. After all, pleasure was not the goal, compliance was. Of course, in the Victorian hierarchy of suffering, arrowroot biscuits were reserved for those who needed just a little bit of hope. If things got worse, you'd graduate to beef tea or gruel. But in the meantime, arrowroot stood as a symbol of that special era when health meant denying yourself even the smallest indulgence. If you complained, you were told it was for your own good. And that, back in my day, we had arrowroot every morning, and we liked it, which was almost certainly a lie. So you nibble your third biscuit, trying to convince yourself that blandness equals healing, that monotony is medicinal, and that flavor is wildly overrated. After all, if generations of Victorians survived on arrowroot, surely you can too. And if your stomach doesn't settle, at least you have a new respect for modern medicine and for cookies that taste like something doctor's orders. A glass of port wine several times a day for delicate constitutions. Whether you're 8 or 80, nothing says health like a prescription for tipsiness before noon. You wake up a little pale, a little dizzy, maybe just a little bored of another day filled with boiled cabbage and drafty hallways. Your mother is whispering with the family doctor in the corner. He nods seriously, examines your tongue with the world's coldest spoon, and writes something on a scrap of paper with a quill. The prescription is both reassuring and deeply suspicious. Port wine, as much as the patient can reasonably tolerate. If you squint, you'll notice that nowhere on the list is water. Victorians loved their port, not just as an after-dinner drink for portly uncles and secret society meetings, but as a full-blown, day-long medical regimen. If you were feeling weak, tired, anxious, or had the kind of low-grade existential malaise only a 19th century winter can bring, you could expect a doctor to recommend a bit of fortified wine. It was believed to enrich the blood and stimulate the spirits. In other words, you're tired because you're not drunk enough. And this wasn't just a remedy for the elderly. Port wine was considered suitable for the whole family. Children with sniffles or stubborn shyness? Port. Grandparents too frail to stand? Port. Overworked fathers and mothers at the end of their rope? Pour another round. Victorians applied port to medical problems with the same relentless optimism as they applied wallpaper. More was always better. The serving method was precise, in the way that only a culture obsessed with etiquette and doilies can be. The wine was poured into tiny glasses, or sometimes large goblets, depending on how dramatic your illness appeared that morning. It was administered in sips, never gulps, accompanied by solemn nods and the silent hope that the doctor wasn't keeping count. The immediate effect was a gentle warmth, a blush to the cheeks, and a sudden, unexpected willingness to see the positive side of a chilly London morning. The secondary effect was that no one really remembered why they felt bad in the first place. Your grandmother, who hasn't left her armchair since the last Jubilee, takes her daily port, looks you in the eye, and says, "She's never felt stronger." Your little brother, red-cheeked and giggling, assures you that he can definitely walk in a straight line if someone just stops the room from spinning. Naturally, there were side effects. Sometimes a bit of over-enthusiasm meant a nap was required by early afternoon. Sometimes there were family arguments over whose port was truly medicinal and whose was just an excuse for a cheeky afternoon tipple. Sometimes dinner would be served twice, just because no one could remember if they'd already eaten. But spirits remained high, at least until they ran out. Victorian medical authorities wrote endlessly about the benefits of port, with some even claiming it could restore vital energy, improve appetite, and bolster the nerves. Modern science would say it just made people cheerfully forgetful and a bit more likely to compliment each other's dreadful mutton stew. It was, if nothing else, the most enjoyable part of being ill. Port was prescribed for anemia, convalescence, heartbreak, mild hysteria, and pretty much anything else that didn't involve a bone visibly poking through the skin. It was considered strengthening, which is a polite way of saying it helped people tolerate the rest of Victorian medicine. Arrowroot biscuits, gruel, and the eternal threat of cod liver oil. So next time you sip a glass of wine, raise it to the Victorians, who believed that a little tipsiness before lunch was just what the doctor ordered. And if your constitution still feels delicate, maybe try another. It's practically medicine. Sore throat? Lack of energy? Try a raw egg mixed with sugar, milk, and a splash of brandy. Because nothing says health like salmonella, Victorian style. It's a chilly Victorian morning. The fire's barely lit. Your throat feels like it's been sandpapered, and you've just announced you're not up to facing a breakfast of cold, day-old mutton. Instead of rest, you're about to receive the full force of Victorian nutritional science. A concoction whipped up in the kitchen with the reckless abandon of someone who's never heard the words food safety. Enter the raw egg flip, a breakfast, a cure, and an accidental dare all at once. Let's talk about preparation. Your mother, or the family cook if you're lucky, cracks a freshish egg straight into a mug. No separating yolk from white, no whisking until smooth, just the glorious, gelatinous reality of an egg plopped whole and trembling into the cup. Next comes a heap of sugar to make it palatable, followed by a generous glug of milk and, crucially, a hearty splash of brandy. Not a drop, not a dash, enough to ensure you'll feel the healing power of Victorian optimism all the way down to your slippers. With a quick stir, the mixture becomes a milky yellow swirl, flecked with suspicious bits of egg white and smelling faintly of breakfast, dessert, and disaster. Bottoms up, your caregiver says, looking at you with the slightly deranged encouragement of someone who genuinely believes this is going to help. You eye the glass, wondering whether the cure is worse than the complaint. But this is medicine, Victorian style. Resistance is futile. The first sip is bracing. It's sweet, rich, oddly creamy, and with a slippery texture that keeps you guessing, will it go down easy, or will your body stage a polite but firm protest? The brandy burns pleasantly. The egg lurks in the background, reminding you that you're taking your life in your hands before breakfast. By the second gulp, you're less concerned about your sore throat and more distracted by the sensation of protein trying to form new life inside you. Why did Victorians do this to themselves? The answer, as usual, comes down to a blend of tradition, optimism, and a lack of modern refrigeration. Eggs were nourishing, sugar was restorative, brandy was invigorating, and not, as modern science would say, inebriating. The milk was there to tie it all together, presumably, and to provide the illusion that this was more a gentle breakfast treat than a foodborne hazard. The egg flip was considered the go-to for people who were under the weather, convalescing, or just a little listless. Children got smaller, slightly less boozy versions. Adults sometimes doubled up, especially during the holidays or if the morning's paper carried bad news. Doctors recommended it for sore throats, coughs, general weakness, and even low spirits, which, in Victorian terms, was everything from actual depression to simply being bored of rain. There were, of course, variations. The fancier families added nutmeg, cinnamon, or a few drops of vanilla, as if flavor could disguise the raw egg's inherent threat. Some recipes swapped milk for cream, sugar for honey, or brandy for rum, depending on the patient's age, moral fortitude, and proximity to the liquor cabinet. But the core experience remained: raw egg, a dash of hope, and a lot of luck. Did it work? Sometimes you either rallied to health or, at the very least, forgot you were sick for a while. Sometimes you just took a nap, waking up later with your fever broken, your sore throat soothed, and a renewed respect for modern pasteurization. Sometimes the raw egg flip simply reminded you that, when it came to Victorian medicine, it was always better to be brave than well. So next time you pour yourself a smoothie, remember, it could be worse. Your ancestors were drinking breakfast cocktails with a side of salmonella and calling it a cure. And somehow, some of them lived to tell the tale. Sago, the little balls that turn up in old-fashioned puddings and modern trauma. Victorians swore by it for bladder complaints. You may call it dessert. Your kidneys call it help. It's evening. The lamp's glow is flickering against the floral wallpaper, and you've spent the day in bed, wrestling with what the doctor calls a sluggish bladder. Before you can protest, the nurse enters, beaming and bearing a dish that wobbles ominously. Sago pudding. You eye it suspiciously, remembering last week's tapioca incident. Is it sweet? Is it savory? Is it food? Or is it penance? The answer, as with most Victorian delicacies, is yes. The Victorians loved to turn their medical anxieties into dinner. Sago pudding was Exhibit A, a culinary experiment that promised relief for your urinary tract while doubling as dessert. If you asked a Victorian matron, she'd tell you that sago cools the system and draws out the excess humours, whatever that means. If you asked the family cook, she'd say it was easy to make and difficult to ruin, which is about as high a compliment as any Victorian pudding ever received. Preparation began with sago pearls, tiny white balls that looked suspiciously like the beads in your grandmother's sewing box. They were soaked, simmered, and swirled into a pot of sweetened milk until they reached the consistency of congealed wallpaper paste. Some recipes added lemon zest or a dash of sherry. Others relied on pure, undiluted blandness. The final product was always the same: a gently trembling mass of translucent spheres, floating in a sea of warm, milky ambiguity. Victorians insisted sago was gentle on the stomach and, crucially, gentle on whatever else needed gentling. The theory was that if it slid down easy, it would slide through the rest of you even easier. Children, the elderly, and anyone suffering delicate conditions could expect a steady diet of sago pudding until the problem resolved, or they simply stopped complaining. If you were particularly unlucky, you'd get sago for breakfast, lunch, and dinner, each time with a slightly different garnish to keep things exciting. Taste-wise, sago pudding was an exercise in restraint. The flavour was so subtle, you needed a vivid imagination just to detect it. A hint of milk, a suggestion of sugar, and, occasionally, the ghost of vanilla. If someone was feeling extravagant, more often, it tasted like nothing at all. If nothing had a texture that clung to your tongue and made your teeth squeak, the experience was less about eating and more about enduring. You didn't take bites so much as you negotiated your way through spoonful after spoonful, quietly hoping for a hint of actual dessert. But dessert it was, at least officially. Families gathered around the table to enjoy their sago pudding, sometimes with a dollop of jam for the rebellious, or a drizzle of treacle for the truly decadent. Children learned early that refusing sago was futile. Better to eat quickly and move on before someone offered seconds. Meanwhile, your kidneys, blissfully unaware of the placebo effect, were expected to mend themselves out of sheer gratitude. Of course, the medical claims were optimistic at best. Sago contained no real medicinal qualities beyond being easy to digest and difficult to choke on. But Victorians clung to hope, tradition, and the belief that anything served warm and wobbly had to be healing. The pudding is soothing, your aunt would say, spooning another helping onto your plate, and besides, it keeps you regular. You decide not to ask for specifics. In the end, sago pudding was more than a dish. It was a ritual. It signaled care, concern, and the eternal Victorian optimism that problems could be solved with patience and pudding. So you finish your bowl, smile bravely, and resolve to treat your kidneys kindly, if only to avoid another helping tomorrow. and as you drift off to sleep, feeling just the slightest bit more hydrated, you realize you may never crave sago pudding, but you'll never forget it. Imagine being so sick that you're only allowed to drink the water from which toast has been steeped and then strained. Not soup, not tea, just soggy bread juice, handed over with the solemnity of a last will and a testament. Let's set the scene. You've been confined to bed, pale as a bedsheet, while the house pulses with the anxious energy of relatives convinced your mild fever is a sign of imminent doom. You're forbidden all solid food. You've been denied tea, too stimulating, and even the luxury of weak broth, too rich, dear. The doctor, a man who smells faintly of old leather and menthol, prescribes only one thing: toast water. The process is as ceremonial as it is depressing. A slice of bread, preferably yesterday's, the kind that could bludgeon a burglar, is toasted until just shy of burnt. It's then submerged in a pot of hot water, left to infuse until the water is coloured with the memory of crust, and strained with all the seriousness usually reserved for champagne. What remains is not a beverage, but a cautionary tale. Victorians genuinely believed toast water could heal. Got a fever? Toast water. Stomach too delicate for food? Toast water. Soul leaving your body in search of flavour? Well, here's a warm mug of hope and disappointment. Toast water was offered with gentle, encouraging words like, "Just sip, darling, it's very nourishing," and "It's what got your Uncle Percy through the influenza of '47. You don't dare point out that Uncle Percy also developed a lifelong distrust of anything brown and crispy. The first sip is an event. It's warm, which is about the best you can say for it. The flavour is subtle, if by subtle you mean almost entirely absent. There's the faintest whiff of carbon and the delicate aftertaste of regret. It's like drinking the runoff from a dishwasher set on early Victorian. The texture is both thin and slightly unsettling, the ghost of breadcrumbs swirling at the bottom as a reminder that someone once, somewhere, thought this counted as a meal. If you were lucky, a creative nurse or desperate aunt might float a tiny scrap of lemon peel or a half spoon of sugar in your mug. These rare additions were left for your health and more for morale, a way to convince you, and themselves, that this was all part of the healing process and not, in fact, an elaborate prank on the sick. The logic behind toast water, like so many things in Victorian wellness, was rooted in the belief that flavour was dangerous and blandness was medicine. Solid food might disturb your constitution. Strong tea or soup could, in the words of the period, overwhelm the stomach. But bread, good, honest, overcooked bread, was thought to impart its restorative qualities to water without any of the risks associated with, actual nutrition. Doctors and mothers swore by it. It's gentle on the digestion, they said, as if that made up for the complete lack of satisfaction. It soothes the nerves, they insisted, as you stared into the cup, wondering if nerves could, in fact, be soothed by disappointment. For children and invalids, toast water was a rite of passage. For adults, it was a stern warning against ever getting sick again. Still, there was a peculiar comfort in the ritual. The careful toasting, the slow pouring, the gentle encouragement as you sipped. It was food as reassurance, a cupful of sympathy and old-fashioned hope. And sometimes, nestled under layers of blankets and familial worry, that was enough. So the next time you're under the weather and someone offers you toast, be grateful it's not just the water. And maybe, just maybe, raise a mug of something flavorful in quiet salute to the generations who survived on bread's final insult and lived to tell the tale. Mustard plasters were actually for the skin, not the sandwich, but somehow mustard made its way into every home remedy. From chest rubs to questionable snacks. Just don't get them mixed up at lunch. It's late in the evening and you're coughing. A dry Victorian cough. The kind that would worry a doctor with an overactive imagination and a penchant for leeches. Your mother, or possibly your grandmother, has already consulted the big book of home remedies and found her favorite cure: mustard. Not on a ham sandwich, but smeared heroically across your chest in the form of a mustard plaster. If you're unlucky, she might recommend both. Let's start with the classic, the mustard plaster. It's a mixture of mustard powder and flour, blended with warm water and slathered onto a cloth. That cloth, steaming and suspiciously yellow, is then placed directly on your bare chest. The sensation is immediate and dramatic. Within seconds, it feels as if you're being gently barbecued. It's drawing out the sickness, someone insists, as your skin starts to prickle, tingle, and protest. The truth? Mustard plasters were Victorian icy hot, except instead of a gentle, numbing chill, you got the feeling that your sternum was being prepared for a brisket competition. Victorians believed the heat from the mustard would stimulate the circulation, opening up the lungs and driving out whatever malevolent forces were, clogging up your respiratory tract. Doctors assured families this was scientific, though it's hard to trust a man who wears that much tweed. If the patient started to turn lobster red, the treatment was working. If the skin blistered, you were told to toughen up, because nobody wanted to be remembered as the only person on the street who couldn't handle a condiment. Of course, there were rules. Mustard plasters could not be left on too long, unless you enjoyed the look and feel of a human crumpet. The exact timing was a closely guarded secret, like the recipe for Victorian fruitcake, only passed down through generations and never, ever written down. If you started to scream, it was time to take the plaster off. If you fell asleep, someone was supposed to check you for signs of life, or at least the faint smell of Dijon. Meanwhile, as you lay there, bravely enduring the tingle, someone in the kitchen was probably making a mustard sandwich. Because in a true Victorian home, nothing was wasted, not even the stuff that was technically medicine. Mustard sandwiches were the quick fix for anything from an upset stomach to the kind of existential gloom you get from living in a world where food safety regulations haven't been invented. A slice of bread, a generous smear of mustard, maybe a curl of cheese if you were lucky, and down it went, delivering the kind of flavor punch that could jolt you back to consciousness, or just remind you that life is full of unpleasant surprises. If you're keeping track, that's mustard on your chest and mustard in your lunch, sometimes in the same afternoon. Mistakes were made. It was not unheard of for a distracted relative to hand you a sandwich that tasted suspiciously of liniment, or for a patient, high on boredom and Victorian optimism, to take a bite out of the wrong side of the remedy. But for all its risks, mustard remained a cornerstone of Victorian healing. Whether it actually cured anything is up for debate, but it certainly created enough distraction to make you forget your original complaint. By the time the burning subsided, you were so relieved you could breathe. You barely noticed the lingering aroma of horseradish wafting through your room. So next time you pass the mustard, remember, it's not just a condiment. It's history's original hot take, sometimes literally. And if anyone offers you a sandwich in the sick room, double check which side of the cloth it came from. The Victorian answer to both insomnia and the Monday blues. Milk punch, equal parts milk, brandy, and sugar. Drink before bed, after dinner, or when your in-laws are visiting for a week. Let's set the scene. You're languishing in the drawing room, eyelids heavy, nerves frayed from a long day of drafty hallways, passive, aggressive relatives, and the persistent sense that something in the wallpaper is watching you. Sleep won't come, but the doctor's made his rounds and offered up the latest marvel of medicinal mixology, milk punch. The prescription is simple. Pour yourself a glass, raise a toast to your continued survival, and hope for dreams that don't involve more laundry. Milk punch wasn't just a drink. It was a lifestyle. To the Victorians, it was the Swiss Army knife of home remedies. Insomnia, milk punch. Cough that won't quit, milk punch. Overwhelmed by the existential weight of owning 12 porcelain dogs, milk punch, twice. There were no fancy pharmacy bottles or intimidating instructions. All you needed was a cow, a bottle of brandy, and a sweet tooth that bordered on reckless. The preparation was as straightforward as Victorian self-medication ever got. Take fresh milk, the kind that may or may not have been boiled today. Add a hearty splash of brandy, a generous pour, since this is for medicinal purposes, not enjoyment, obviously. Heap in a spoonful of sugar, or two if you'd had an especially harrowing day. Stir briskly. Some recipes called for a dash of nutmeg, a lemon, twist, or a few strips of orange peel for digestive support. But let's be honest, the real healing came from the brandy. You'd sip it slowly from a dainty glass, never a mug, because dignity must be preserved, even when you're quietly sedating yourself at 8:30 p.m. The first taste was a strange combination of school lunchroom nostalgia and the reckless adult thrill of pouring liquor into anything vaguely nutritious. The milk was soothing, cool and creamy. The sugar, a cheerful jolt of sweetness. And the brandy, well, the brandy could silence the wildest anxieties. Or, at the very least, make your in-laws seem like background noise. Milk punch was dispensed liberally to anyone suffering from the Victorian catch-all nervous exhaustion. It was considered gentle enough for children. Just a little less brandy, allegedly. And robust enough for adults reeling from bad news, bad weather, or just bad company. After all, in a world before Netflix and prescription sleeping pills, what could be more comforting than a bedtime beverage with just enough kick to send you floating toward unconsciousness? For those with truly stubborn symptoms, chronic insomnia, heartbreak, existential ennui, a second glass was not discouraged. It settles the nerves, the doctor would say, handing you another round and a conspiratorial wink. If you woke up with a headache, you were told to simply try again, with perhaps a bit more milk for balance. Moderation was a modern concept. And besides, what harm could come from a little extra courage in a cup? Of course, not every recipe was a triumph. Some households got creative, introducing eggs, rum, or even a scoop of leftover ice cream for special occasions. A few brave souls tried clarifying their milk punch with lemon juice and straining it through muslin, resulting in a concoction that looked like something between a health tonic and a science experiment. But at its heart, the classic milk punch was as simple as a lullaby and as effective as a gentle knockout punch. So tonight, as you reach for your herbal tea, imagine a world where the cure for everything, from a stubbed toe to an existential crisis, was a glass of sweet, boozy milk. The Victorians may not have had many answers, but they certainly knew how to toast to their own survival. And who could sleep through that? If you have a fever, a cough, or just an existential crisis, the answer is clear. Barley water. Hot, bland, and gently slimy. It's like drinking the memory of real flavor. It's another stuffy Victorian afternoon. You're languishing on the sofa, the world spinning gently, head throbbing with a fever that won't quit. The doctor has just left, after solemnly announcing that you are, in fact, alive, but only just. He prescribes the usual solution for every malady short of decapitation: barley water. Your mother rushes off to the kitchen, a look of grim purpose on her face. You can already hear the sound of ancient grains being boiled within an inch of their lives. Barley water isn't what it sounds like. You might expect a crisp, refreshing drink, maybe something you'd find at a wellness spa. or an overpriced juice bar. Instead, what arrives is a mug of pale, slightly viscous liquid, hovering somewhere between tea, soup, and a puddle you'd cross the street to avoid. The smell is faintly nutty, the taste is a masterclass in understatement, and the texture is best described as mildly alarming. For the Victorians, this drink was medicine, hydration, and spiritual fortitude all in one. Barley water was served hot for chest colds, warm for headaches, and lukewarm for children whose only ailment was being difficult at bedtime. If you were feeling extra adventurous, you might add a slice of lemon or a spoonful of sugar, but only if your constitution could handle the excitement. Flavor, as always, was considered a dangerous luxury. Drinking barley water was an event, one that managed to be both nurturing and slightly humiliating. The process was as ritualistic as it was disappointing. Barley, usually the oldest bag in the pantry, was rinsed, boiled for ages, strained, and then the precious result, water that looked like it had second thoughts, was poured with the seriousness of a potion in a fairy tale. Some recipes promised to clarify the humours. Others just promised to keep you busy sipping until you forgot you were sick. Victorian mothers swore by it. Doctors prescribed it for everyone, from teething infants to elderly relatives who hadn't left their armchairs since the Crimean War. Barley water was thought to be soothing to the stomach, gentle on the kidneys, and capable of drawing out toxins, which, in practice, meant that you would be running to the chamber pot all afternoon and feeling oddly proud of it. Children, naturally, dreaded it. You'd watch the barley pearls swell and burst in the pot, convinced that whatever was happening could not possibly end in anything delicious. Sipping the finished product, you'd try to convince yourself it was just thin oatmeal or the ghost of lemonade. But it never fooled anyone. You'd swallow with a brave face, all the while imagining your friends down the street enjoying forbidden pleasures like broth or, heaven help us, actual juice. Barley water had its social uses, too. It was a gentle way to signal to guests that you cared for their well-being, and also that you didn't trust them with your good tea. For invalids, it was a mark of status. The more bland beverages you were offered, the sicker, and therefore more interesting, you were presumed to be. For the truly unlucky, it was served alongside gruel, in what can only be described as a masterclass in culinary disappointment. In the end, barley water was less about healing and more about enduring. It was a liquid comfort, a bland embrace, and a Victorian mother's way of saying, "I love you, but I also don't want you getting ideas about flavour." So tonight, if you're feeling parched, pour yourself a glass of something, anything, flavourful. And as you drink, give a silent toast to the generations who bravely hydrated with the world's most earnest glass of beige. Nothing says healing like pure animal fat baked into a doughy lump. Prescribed for children, invalids, and anyone with a death wish. It's late afternoon in the Victorian sick room. The air is heavy with the mingled scents of laundry, soap, wet wool, and despair. You're under the weather. Perhaps you're convalescing from a bad cold, or you've simply admitted to being peaky. Suddenly, a cheery aunt or determined nurse bursts in with a bowl of something steaming, beige, and only slightly alarming. This, you are told, is suet pudding, the ultimate restorative, the culinary equivalent of a warm hug from someone who isn't listening to your dietary preferences. Let's break it down. Suet is, quite literally, fat scraped from the kidneys of sheep or cows. Not butter, not lard, but a substance so dense and heat-resistant that it's often used in bird feeders and emergency candles. The Victorians, possessed of equal parts optimism and culinary recklessness, decided that this was just the thing for an ailing child or elderly invalid. Combine it with flour, sugar, maybe a handful of dried fruit if it's a special occasion, and bake or steam it into a mass so solid you could use it to patch a leaky roof. The first bite, is an adventure. The pudding is warm and hefty, sticky with syrup or jam, and deeply, profoundly rich. The texture is a cross between bread and cake, but with an undeniable, almost haunting presence offered. You chew and realize that this is a dish designed not to excite, but to fortify. This is food as architecture, something that could withstand a mild flood or a brief siege if necessary. Victorians swore by it. Suet pudding was thought to build strength, promote vigor, and stick to the ribs, which is a polite way of saying it would weigh you down like a sandbag in a strong wind. If you were ill, you got suet pudding. If you were growing, you got double. It's good for the constitution, they'd say, which really just meant it was cheaper than meat and more filling than air. For children, suet pudding was both treat and threat. The sweet version was drowned in golden syrup or treacle, a cunning way to mask the fact that you were essentially eating desertified tallow. If you hesitated, adults would offer up stories of their own childhood, when they had to eat suet pudding 3 times a week, uphill both ways, and it never did them any harm except, possibly, for the lingering look of mild panic every time the pudding basin came out. Of course, there were savoury versions too. Think steak and kidney pudding, a meat pie where the crust alone could power a small village for the winter. But even the plainest suet pudding was served with the expectation that you'd finish it. Smile politely, and keep quiet about the sudden heaviness in your chest. Medical science of the time was keen on calories, and nothing packed a punch quite like suet. If your cheeks were pale, your limbs thin, or you simply looked too energetic for someone with nervous exhaustion, a double helping of suet pudding would soon sort you out. And if you made it through a second serving, you were either on the mend or ready to be preserved for the next ice age. It's hard to imagine now, reaching for dessert in the hope it might revive you, only to realize you've accidentally eaten 3 weeks' worth of saturated fat in a single sitting. But to the Victorians, this was medicine, love, and mild punishment, all in one sticky, rib-sticking package. So tonight, as you contemplate your own dessert choices, be grateful for moderation. And remember, if anyone ever offers you suet pudding for your health, check your pulse, just in case. Victorians genuinely believed that orange marmalade could cure a case of the blues. Because if sugar and citrus can't fix you, what can? It's one of those drizzly, endless London mornings. The sun is hiding, the tea is lukewarm, and you've announced to the breakfast table that you are suffering from melancholy of the deepest order. Your family glances up, collectively concerned, as if sadness is contagious and must be nipped in the bud before it spreads to the curtains. Enter Victorian wisdom. Before anyone can prescribe a brisk walk or an impromptu recitation of Latin verbs, your mother reaches for the jar of orange marmalade. There's a ceremony to it, naturally. She unscrews the lid with the gravity of a seasoned apothecary. The marmalade glows in the dull morning light, a sticky, amber promise of better days. She spreads it thickly on a slice of the most uninspiring bread the century has to offer and presents it with a reassuring nod. "Eat this, dear," she says, "and you'll feel yourself in no time." There's no mention of vitamins, no talk of serotonin, just a quiet faith in the healing powers of fruit preserved with enough sugar to stun a small horse. Victorians approached mental health the way they approached everything else, with a mixture of stiff upper lip, wild optimism, and a sugar addiction that bordered on heroic. The logic was unassailable. Oranges were rare, expensive, and imported from places so exotic that just saying Seville could lift the mood of an entire drawing room. Marmalade, then, was the taste of travel, sunshine, and luxury, all rolled into one breakfast condiment. The first bite is a minor revelation. The bread is forgettable, but the marmalade is a riot of flavor. Sweet, sharp, and just a little bitter. It sticks to your teeth and jolts your taste buds awake. You can practically feel the citrus slicing through the fog of your mood. Or maybe that's just the sugar. Either way, there's something undeniably cheerful about starting the day with a mouthful of orange zest and hope. Victorian medical books were filled with marmalade testimonials. Stomach upset? Marmalade. General malaise? Double marmalade. Feeling uninspired, uncreative, or simply sick of your own relatives? A healthy spoonful of marmalade was prescribed, preferably on toast, but in a pinch, straight from the jar. It was the original emotional support snack, predating chocolate by at least a generation, and arguably more socially acceptable to eat with a knife. But it wasn't all about mood. Marmalade was also considered good for digestion, possibly because it encouraged you to wash it down with several cups of tea. Doctors wrote glowing letters to medical journals, citing the case of Lady So-and-so, cured of a mysterious sadness after a week of heavy marmalade dosing and brisk walks around the shrubbery. No one mentions that Lady So-and-so probably just needed an excuse to eat more sugar without judgment. Of course, some households took their marmalade seriously. Recipes were guarded like state secrets, and each batch was the subject of heated debate at the breakfast table. Was it bitter enough? Was it set to the right consistency? Could it cure Aunt Mildred's gloom, or just distract her with enough zest to last until lunchtime? There were even contests where local women would submit their marmalade for public judging, the winner bestowed with bragging rights and the unofficial title of most uplifting preserves. Modern science would laugh, of course. But even now, there's something comforting about a jar of marmalade, something that says, things can only get so bad when you have citrus and sugar on your side. It might not cure true melancholy, but it does offer a small, sticky ray of hope on a grey morning. So next time you're feeling low, reach for the marmalade. It might not be medicine, but for a few blissful bites, it just might be enough. Backed up? Victorians had a one-word solution. Prunes. Served, stewed, mashed, or cold. They were both cure and punishment in a single bowl. It's late evening, and you haven't, well, let's just say you're indisposed. The doctor has been called, arriving with the somber air of a man prepared for a crisis. He glances at your pale face, asks some deeply personal questions about your last movement, and, after a dramatic pause, prescribes the Victorian panacea, stewed prunes. Your heart sinks, your digestive system quivers. Somewhere in the next room, your mother is already boiling water. Stewed prunes were a Victorian institution, a remedy so trusted that it was nearly a religion. If you complained of sluggishness, heaviness, or simply too much bread and not enough fresh air, prunes were produced with the solemnity of a sacred relic. The dried fruit, already wrinkled and foreboding, would be plopped into a saucepan and gently simmered until they turned soft, inky, and fragrant. If you can call that aroma fragrant rather than haunting, the moment arrives. A bowl of glossy, purple, black prunes is set before you, steaming gently, juices swirling like a potion in a wizard's lair. The Victorians didn't stop at mere fruit, they'd mash them, serve them cold for the truly desperate, or add a dash of lemon or a spoon of sugar for the children. But no matter how they dressed them up, the underlying threat remained: eat the prunes or suffer the consequences. Or perhaps, eat the prunes and suffer different consequences. The first taste is always a shock. There's a sweetness, sure, but it's the kind of sweetness that suggests someone is trying to trick you. The texture is both soft and suspiciously clingy. Each bite comes with the knowledge that you are participating in a tradition handed down through generations, not out of love, but out of necessity. You chew slowly, feeling every fiber of your being and every fiber in your bowl, moving you toward an inevitable fate. Prunes were the ultimate dual-purpose Victorian remedy, medicine and punishment. Mothers swore by them, grandmothers wielded them like weapons, and children learned early that resistance was not only futile, but also uncomfortable. Doctors wrote approvingly of their efficacious action upon the bowels. Households kept emergency tins tucked away, a quiet threat lurking at the back of the pantry for days when things weren't, as the Victorians liked to say, proceeding with regularity. Of course, there were variations. Some families had recipes for prune compote, prunes boiled with cloves, and a suspiciously heavy hand with the sugar bowl. Others favored the direct approach. Prunes, water, heat, and a dash of disappointment. In the best households, prunes were paired with toast water for the truly memorable sick day, a meal designed to both move you and humble you. The medical logic behind prunes was simple and, surprisingly, correct. Prunes are full of fiber and sorbitol, a combination guaranteed to get things moving. But Victorians, never ones to leave well enough alone, added their own layer of moral philosophy. Regularity was next to godliness. And a stubborn digestive system was surely a sign that you'd eaten too many sweets, read too many penny dreadfuls, or simply thought improper thoughts. In the end, you finished your bowl, sighed with resignation, and waited for the inevitable. The household, meanwhile, watched with a mixture of sympathy and grim anticipation. Because in every Victorian family, the power of the stewed prune was respected, if not exactly loved. So tonight, if you find yourself in need of a little encouragement, spare a thought for your ancestors, who faced their destiny with nothing but courage, dignity, and a bowl of prunes. And maybe, just this once, be grateful for modern medicine and modern plumbing. Who needs Neosporin? In the Victorian era, porridge wasn't just for eating, it was also for slapping onto wounds, burns, and mysterious rashes. Just don't get confused in the middle of breakfast. It's another morning in your Victorian sick room. The sunlight creeps reluctantly through heavy drapes, glancing off a bedside table littered with empty cups and used handkerchiefs. You wake to the faint but unmistakable aroma of oats. Comforting, familiar, and, if you're honest, slightly suspicious. There's a bowl on your lap, steaming, creamy, studded with the promise of breakfast and, if the day takes a turn, emergency medicine. Because here in the 19th century, oatmeal is the Swiss Army knife of domestic remedies. Eat it for breakfast? Certainly. But scrape some aside, and you have the perfect cure for anything that oozes, itches, or aches. Burns, boils, insect bites, even mysterious Victorian inflammations, oatmeal poultices were the answer. Just a handful of warm, soggy oats, pressed lovingly, or resignedly, onto the afflicted area, held in place with linen strips and prayers. The logic behind this was charmingly simple. Oatmeal was soothing, drawing, and blessedly bland. If it comforted the stomach, why not try it on the rest of the body? And so, Victorian households kept oats in bulk, not only for porridge but for quick deployment as an all-purpose first aid. You'd barely finish your breakfast before someone in the family, child, parent, random cousin, needed a poultice slapped on their latest scrape or rash. Woe betide the person who couldn't tell the breakfast oats from the first aid oats. Application was a ritual. The oats were cooked, cooled just enough not to scald, ideally, and then dolloped generously onto the wound or burn. Sometimes honey was added, for antiseptic purposes, or a bit of vinegar for drawing out the poison, though in practice, it just added an extra note of confusion. Linen was wrapped around the patient in a way that made you look and feel like the world's saddest burrito. And then you waited. There was no quick fix, just hours of sitting quietly, trying not to think about whether you'd soon be sharing breakfast with your scab. Victorian children grew up with the phrase, "Let the poultice do its work," which was code for "Don't pick at it, and please, for the love of all that is holy, do not eat it." The experience was, at best, slightly pleasant. A gentle warmth, a faint oaty aroma, a mother's hand on your brow. At worst, it was sticky, itchy, and a source of deep family embarrassment if guests happened to call. More than one child endured the walk of shame down the hall, bandaged in oats and linen, while relatives tried to stifle laughter behind their teacups. And, of course, there was the confusion. The Victorians were resourceful, but they weren't always organized. In larger households, it wasn't unheard of for someone to mistakenly eat the poultice bowl, only to discover that breakfast tasted alarmingly of camphor and bandages. Likewise, the unlucky patient might get a portion of someone's actual porridge spooned onto their burn, prompting a hasty swap and a family story for years to come. Modern science, of course, has confirmed that oatmeal does have soothing, anti-inflammatory properties. But in Victorian times, its powers were legendary. Doctors recommended poultices for everything from joint pain to nervous eruptions. If it failed, well, at least you could eat the evidence. So, as you tuck yourself in tonight, remember, in the Victorian home, breakfast wasn't just the most important meal of the day, it was also your emergency first aid kit. And if you're feeling a bit rough, maybe keep a bowl of porridge close by. Just be sure you know which one to eat. Teething? Won't sleep? Victorians went straight to the bottle, brandy for babies. A treatment so effective it usually ended with a nap and a suspiciously quiet nursery. Let's set the scene. You're a parent in 1860s England, exhausted, sleep-deprived, and quietly praying for a miracle. Or at least 5 minutes of silence. The baby is screaming, gums swollen and cheeks flushed. The family doctor, having just prescribed a healthy dose of beef tea for your indigestion, now offers you a beef solution that would get you arrested today. A few drops of brandy, right on the gums, and if that fails, a teaspoon in the milk. He winks, and you wonder if he's joking. He isn't. Brandy for babies was less a last resort and more a default setting. Victorian childcare advice read like the world's most dangerous cocktail menu. Teething mixture? Start with brandy. Won't sleep? Brandy. A touch of colic? Perhaps a bit more brandy. You begin to suspect that the only real criteria for a good parent was whether you could keep the decanter full. If the nursery went suspiciously quiet, you just assumed the remedy was working. No one thought to check for the long-term side effects. This was the age when quiet was always preferable to alive and making noise. The logic, such as it was, rested on two pillars. One, that alcohol was a natural sedative, and two, that babies were, essentially, small adults who could be taken in hand with the same remedies that soothed frazzled grown-ups. Brandy had been used for centuries as medicine, for everything from shock to snake bites. So why not try it on your fussiest family member? It was considered warming, comforting, and stimulating to the digestion, Victorian code for guaranteed nap time. The application was simple and, in retrospect, truly alarming. A little spoonful in the milk, a dab on the gums, or, if the baby was really upset, a neat shot followed by a lullaby and a prayer. Mothers compared notes on dosage, confident that a baby's first word would probably be cheers. Grandmothers tutted approvingly, reminiscing about how they'd survived the Crimean winters with nothing but hard tack, boiled potatoes, and the occasional sip of spirits. Fathers, if they noticed at all, simply hoped the baby would finally let them finish the paper in peace. Results were immediate. The child would quiet, then sleep, sometimes for hours. The parents would breathe a sigh of relief and return to their never-ending chores. Of course, there was always the risk of overdoing it. Victorian medical journals occasionally included cautionary tales of over-relaxed infants or mysterious cases of chronic drowsiness. But these were dismissed as the cost of doing business in a world without pacifiers, ibuprofen, or Peppa Pig. Brandy wasn't reserved just for teething, either. It was a universal soother, trotted out for earaches, coughs, and even the occasional family celebration, because nothing says happy christening like a dash of spirits in the bottle. If you could drink it, you could use it, and if it tasted foul, all the better. Medicine was supposed to be unpleasant, after all. Modern readers will, of course, be aghast, but to the Victorians, this was compassionate care, a practical, immediate solution for a problem that could otherwise drive a parent to distraction. The alternative was to suffer through endless nights of wailing, clutching your own brandy glass with trembling hands, and praying for a time when science would invent something, anything, less intoxicating. So, tonight, as you drift off to sleep, spare a thought for those 19th century parents who survived on equal parts hope, love, and dubious childcare advice. And be grateful that your remedy for a sleepless night no longer comes with a hangover and a suspiciously quiet nursery. Chest cold? Sore throat? Time to break out the goose grease. Rubbed on liberally, it was believed to pull the sickness right out of you and into your bed linens forever. It's the dead of winter in Victorian England, and your household has descended into the annual chorus of hacking, wheezing, and sniffling. You're bundled in a bed, layered with more woolen blankets than scents. Your throat aches, your chest rattles, and your mother, armed with the confidence of 10 generations, has fetched the remedy that's never failed to make the situation at least more memorable: goose grease. The ritual is simple and, depending on your perspective, either soothing or slightly traumatic. Someone, usually your mother or grandmother, because men of the house are conveniently absent when the slathering starts, dips a hand into a jar of yellowish, faintly feathery fat. There's a certain barnyard whiff to it, a reminder that your medicine cabinet is just one step away from the barnyard. She warms the fat between her palms and, before you can protest, starts rubbing it vigorously onto your chest, throat, and, for good measure, your back. It's not a gentle massage, it's more like being buttered for roasting. Victorians believed that goose grease, when applied with enough conviction, could draw out all the chill, cough, and fever that plagued the afflicted. The heat from the friction, combined with the insulating layer of fat, was thought to force illness to the surface, where it could be absorbed into your nightshirt and bedclothes, never to be seen again. And if you woke up the next morning with your sheets glued to your skin and a slight aroma of holiday dinner, well, that was a sign the remedy had worked. Of course, there were variations on the theme. In some households, the goose grease was mixed with camphor, turpentine, or even mustard powder, depending on just how badly your family wanted you to clear your sinuses. Sometimes a bit of molasses or vinegar was added to improve the drawing effect, or maybe just to make you so sticky that no germ would dare linger. It was all very scientific, by Victorian standards, which is to say, it was based on optimism, superstition, and whatever happened to be in the pantry. The experience was, let's be honest, unforgettable. The grease was cold at first, then oddly comforting as it warmed to your skin. Soon, however, you were enveloped in a pungent cocoon, a walking, snuffling roast. You were swaddled tightly, tucked under layers of blankets and flannel, and told to sweat it out. Sometimes, for extra effect, they'd sprinkle pepper into your socks or wrap your neck in a scarf dipped in hot vinegar. If you weren't cured by morning, At least you'd be thoroughly marinated. Did it work? Well, you probably felt warmer, and in a world without central heating, antibiotics, or decongestants, sometimes feeling warm was victory enough. The actual science was shaky. Goose grease doesn't kill viruses, but it does make you rethink your life choices and perhaps distracts you from your cough, if only by introducing an entirely new set of discomforts. As you drifted off to sleep, skin glistening and sheets sticking, you wondered what modern children would make of this. Would they trade their vapor rub for a pot of animal fat and a brisk, slightly judgmental rub-down from grandma? Probably not. But for Victorians, it was the ultimate comfort. Practical, immediate, and with just enough weirdness to make a lasting family story. So the next time you're reaching for cough syrup, spare a thought for your goose-greased ancestors, those brave souls who faced the sniffles head-on, slathered in faith and poultry fat, and went to bed smelling faintly of Christmas dinner and desperation. If that's not resilience, what is? Coughing fit? Swallow a mixture of vinegar and honey. Bonus points for drinking it warm and pretending it isn't just salad dressing for your esophagus. It's another chilly Victorian evening, and your cough has reached the point where your family is considering moving you to the coal shed for a bit of peace. Your throat feels raw, your chest rattles like a haunted wardrobe, and you're just about to drift off when your mother appears at your bedside with a mug, brimming with dubious optimism and the tangy aroma of, yes, vinegar and honey. No one in the house can remember where the recipe came from. Perhaps a grandmother, perhaps a traveling apothecary, perhaps just someone desperate for a night's sleep. But the logic is perfectly Victorian. Honey, because it's soothing and vaguely medicinal, and vinegar, because it's a disinfectant, and also because it's cheap. If your parents could have distilled hope itself and mixed it with pantry staples, they would have. Instead, you get salad dressing for the soul. The preparation is an act of faith and economy. A spoonful of honey, runny if you're lucky, suspiciously grainy if you're not, is dropped into a mug. Over this, a healthy splash of vinegar, apple cider if the household is feeling fancy, malt if it's a lean year, is poured. The whole mixture is then topped up with hot water and stirred with a spoon that's been through more medical crises than your family physician. Sometimes, for extra healing power, a slice of lemon or a dash of pepper is added, just to ensure the experience is as unforgettable as possible. The first sip is a full-body event. There's the immediate, searing tang of vinegar, followed by the sticky sweetness of honey, and a warmth that slides down your throat and settles somewhere between comfort and culinary confusion. The hope is that the honey will soothe and coat, while the vinegar will burn away whatever's lodged in your pipes. The reality is more complicated. You cough, you sputter, you briefly consider running away to join a circus where no one ever drinks hot vinegar. Victorians, however, were convinced of its power. Vinegar and honey was the poor man's penicillin, a catch-all cure for everything from the common cold to moral weakness. If you had a cough, you drank it. If you were unlucky enough to be poor, you drank even more. Doctors wrote approving letters to medical journals about the restorative effect of honeyed acetic solutions. Grandmothers recited tales of children, pale as ghosts, returned to rosy-cheeked health by this simple potion. But it wasn't just for coughs. The same mixture was recommended for sore throats, sluggish digestion, and even as a skin wash for troublesome eruptions. In the absence of modern pharmaceuticals, vinegar and honey was the versatile friend of the prostal van, and at a day, of T5, hard-pressed and the hard-up. For some, it was even a bedtime drink, a Victorian nightcap for those who couldn't afford brandy or didn't fancy falling asleep with their chest slathered in goose grease. children were the least convinced. To a child, the mug of vinegar and honey was a symbol of both hope and betrayal. You knew it was supposed to help, but every instinct in your body screamed that this was punishment for sins you couldn't remember committing. Adults swore by it, but children learned early that swallow it down. Dear, it's for your own good was Victorian code for you won't like this, but we don't have any better ideas. And yet, sometimes it worked. Maybe it was the honey, maybe the vinegar, or maybe just the power of ritual and the comfort of being cared for. You'd drift off to sleep, throat slightly singed, but with the warmth of family around you and the reassurance that at least your medicine didn't involve leeches or another bowl of stewed prunes. So, next time you reach for cough syrup, give a nod to vinegar and honey, the original home remedy, lovingly served, stubbornly endured, and, for a fleeting moment, almost magic, made from orchid roots, salep was sold by street vendors as a cure-all for everything from sore throats to heartbreak. Spoiler: it cured nothing except perhaps a desire to try new beverages. Picture a foggy Victorian street, the kind that smells of coal smoke, damp wool, and opportunity. You're bundled in a shawl, shivering and pale, your voice hoarse from weeks of persistent cough, or possibly just the general melancholy of living in a time when your main source of entertainment is staring at wallpaper. Enter the salep vendor, his pushcart steaming invitingly in the chill, promising warmth, relief, and just maybe a little hope in a mug. Salep was the Victorian answer to every ailment not already claimed by beef tea or barley water. The star ingredient? Ground-up tubers from a particular type of wild orchid, not a flower you'd find in a bouquet. Think more mysterious root dug from a windswept hillside, the sort of thing you'd expect to see in a potion, not a drink. The vendor would boil these ground roots into a thick, creamy liquid, adding milk, sugar, cinnamon, or whatever else might distract from the underlying reality. You were sipping on flour paste. The first taste is, well, surprising. The texture is smooth, verging on gloopy, a kind of drinkable custard. If custard were made by someone who'd only heard rumors about eggs. The flavor? Mildly floral, gently sweet, with a faint hint of the earth it once grew in. It's not unpleasant, but it's not exactly inspiring either. You sip cautiously, unsure if you're about to be cured or simply distracted. In the best-case scenario, it's warm, filling, and oddly comforting. In the worst-case scenario, you're out a penny and still coughing. Victorian medical logic was equal parts creativity and desperation. Salep, they insisted, could soothe sore throats, ease upset stomachs, warm frozen fingers, and even mend a broken heart. Why? Because it was rare, and rare things are always more powerful. Street vendors pitched it with the enthusiasm of modern wellness influencers. Guaranteed to restore vitality, make your cheeks rosy, brighten the mood of even the gloomiest governess. Some even claimed it worked wonders for the lungs, which, in an era where the air itself was out to get you, felt like a pretty good deal. Mothers would send children out with a few coins and strict instructions. Bring back a cup of salep for the sick room, or perhaps for the family member most likely to complain about the weather. Invalids nursed steaming mugs by the fireside, and aspiring poets drank it while composing odes to lost loves and slightly damp socks. It was, above all, a beverage of optimism. If it didn't heal, at least it distracted, and in the 19th century, distraction counted for a lot. The reality, of course, was that salep did absolutely nothing, except perhaps hydrate you and offer a pleasant, starchy warmth on a cold morning. But for many Victorians, that was enough. The act of sipping a hot, unfamiliar drink was medicinal in its own right, a ritual of care, hope, and brief escape from the usual parade of questionable treatments. And let's be honest, Compared to cod liver oil or a brisk rub down with goose grease, it was practically a spa day. Salep became so popular that some worried about the extinction of the very orchids used to make it. A rare instance of Victorian health trends threatening actual biodiversity. But the demand endured, and so did the belief that a strange new beverage, served warm from a street cart, could fix what ailed you. So next time you pass by a trendy coffee shop with a mysterious root latte on the menu, remember the Victorians and their beloved Salep. It may not have cured anything, but for a moment it made the world seem a little cozier, and sometimes that's all the medicine you really need. Bitten, poisoned, or just generally unwell, take a spoonful of treacle, a thick, dark syrup Victorians swore could cure anything, except maybe your distaste for treacle. It's another gloomy day on the cobblestones. The fire is low, the rain is high, and you're feeling out of sorts. Maybe it's a headache, maybe you stubbed your toe, maybe you were just bitten by something with more legs than you'd like to count. Victorian logic dictates there's no need for panic. Just reach for the treacle tin. If it's not nailed down or reserved for Sunday's baking, someone will soon be waving it under your nose. Treacle is the dark, sticky byproduct of sugar refining, a sort of primordial syrup that clings to the spoon with a gravity that's almost emotional. It's as sweet as it is intimidating, with an aroma somewhere between burnt caramel and old molasses. To the Victorians, this was a miracle in a jar, as essential as fresh air and as omnipresent as unsolicited advice. Let's be honest. The actual taste is a commitment. One bite, and you know you're not dealing with dessert, but with something that wants to fix you. Or, failing that, at least slow you down enough to forget what was wrong. It's thick, gloopy, and lingers on your tongue like a slightly resentful memory. A single spoonful, they claimed, could draw out poison, neutralize venoms, or revive the constitution. If you didn't feel better, at least you'd be too busy chewing to complain. The treacle remedy list was impressively long. Sore throat? Treacle in hot water. Indigestion? Treacle mixed with vinegar. Snake bite? A hearty dose, followed by a quick prayer. General malaise, melancholy, or the creeping suspicion you'd been hexed by the neighbour's cat. You guessed it, treacle. For Victorians, it was the edible equivalent of duct tape. If it didn't work the first time, you clearly hadn't used enough. Medical texts from the era were full of glowing reviews. Treacle was said to draw out toxins, fortify the blood, and counteract the effects of pestilence, which is an impressively broad claim for something that started life as factory residue. In plague years, entire families dosed themselves by the spoonful, convinced that the sticky syrup would armor them against invisible dangers. Some recipes for Venetian treacle contain dozens of ingredients, herbs, spices, and sometimes, distressingly, powdered viper, just to ensure that if you did survive, you'd have an anecdote to last the rest of your life. In reality, treacle's power was mostly psychological. There's a strange comfort in being given something thick, sweet, and deeply traditional when you're unwell, especially when the alternative is a cold compress, or worse, cod liver oil. Treacle required faith, and faith is what the Victorians had in abundance. Parents handed out treacle for tantrums, teachers kept it in classrooms for fainting spells, and doctors prescribed it for complaints that ranged from a touch of the vapors to too much dancing at the assembly. Children, of course, had mixed feelings. Some loved it, eyes wide as their spoon clinked against the glass. Others learned to dread the telltale stickiness that meant their ailments, real or imagined, would soon be drowned in molasses. Adults pretended to take it seriously, but mostly they just relished the rare opportunity to eat something resembling dessert in the name of health. As for the modern world, treacle's glory has faded, but it lives on in puddings and nostalgic recipes. and in the collective memory of anyone whose ancestors believed that universal antidote could come in a tin. So next time you're feeling a bit off, give a nod to the Victorians. Take a spoonful of something sweet. Believe it'll help. And know that sometimes hope is the best medicine of all, even if it's just stuck to the roof of your mouth. Nothing says healing like juicing a root vegetable and telling yourself it's medicine. Victorians drank raw turnip juice for coughs, colds, and the opportunity to regret all their choices. It's a grey, drippy morning in Victorian England, and you've woken up with a cough that rattles the windows and a throat that feels like you gargled with sand. Your mother has already sent word to the kitchen. No need for a doctor yet. Not when you have vegetables and the unshakable faith that misery builds character. Enter the household's latest wellness trend: raw turnip juice. Picture it. A perfectly innocent white and purple turnip, minding its own business in the root cellar. Suddenly, it's yanked out, scrubbed, and, instead of joining the roast, is sliced, grated, and wrung out with the kind of determination usually reserved for making cheese or breaking spirits. The resulting juice is pale, watery, and faintly sulphurous, with an aroma that wafts through the kitchen and makes the cat reconsider all its life choices. No effort is made to improve the flavour. This isn't a modern juice bar, and there's no kale, apple, or ginger to dress things up. If you're lucky, there's a spoonful of honey or a dash of lemon to help the medicine go down. More often, though, it's just pure, undiluted turnip essence, delivered in a chipped teacup and accompanied by the kind of encouragement that sounds suspiciously like a threat. Down the hatch, dear, and you'll feel better in no time. The first sip is legendary, cold, sharp, with a bitterness that clings to your tongue and a faint aftertaste of dirt. It's the kind of drink that makes you reevaluate how badly you want to recover. You're told it draws out the sickness, soothes the lungs, and purifies the blood. In reality, it mostly purifies your willingness to complain, because the fastest way to stop being sick in a Victorian household is to stop being sick in front of whoever's holding the turnip juicer. The science, as you might expect, was optimistic at best. Turnips do contain vitamins and minerals, but their power as a curative is mostly limited to making sure you don't fake a cough twice. Still, doctors, never ones to let a good placebo go to waste, recommended turnip juice for everything from the common cold to persistent chest complaints. For especially stubborn cases, you might be told to gargle with it. A fate so grim you begin to appreciate stewed prunes by comparison. Children learned early to dread the telltale sound of a turnip being grated in the kitchen. It meant someone was ill, or at least pretending to be, and that soon everyone would be expected to take their medicine as a preventative. Siblings watched each other with the suspicion of prisoners sharing a cell. Did you finish yours? No, but I hid it behind the coal scuttle. Genius. Pass the bread. Yet, for all its horror, raw turnip juice was an act of care. Mothers believed in its healing power. Grandmothers insisted it was the secret to their longevity. And even fathers took the occasional swig, if only to demonstrate stoic masculinity. There was a strange, shared camaraderie in suffering through it together. A bonding ritual in a world with few comforts and even fewer cures. And who knows? Maybe the ritual did do some good. Maybe it was the vitamin C, maybe the placebo, maybe just the warm glow of surviving another cup of liquid suffering. By the end of your convalescence, you'd either be cured or forever immune to root vegetables in all forms. So next time you reach for an orange juice or a cozy cup of tea, give a silent nod to your ancestors, those resilient souls who faced every cold with courage, community, and the certain knowledge that healing sometimes comes disguised as a root, a grater, and the taste of pure regret. Post-surgery? Ill child? Your doctor prescribes rice water. Basically boiled rice juice. Nutritious, allegedly, and only marginally more exciting than watching wallpaper dry. It's been a rough few days in your Victorian household. Someone's just come home from the doctor, bandaged and pale. Or perhaps the littlest member of the family has succumbed to a mysterious fever, one of those endless Victorian childhood illnesses that seem to come standard with the furniture. The entire house is on alert, meals are suspended, and suddenly all culinary ambition is replaced by a single, haunting instruction from the doctor: rice water, thrice daily. The preparation is more ritual than recipe. Rice, preferably the plainest, cheapest kind, gets washed, boiled in water, and then strained with the kind of patience only available to people who haven't yet invented television. What you're left with is a cloudy, lukewarm liquid, hovering somewhere between almost soup and culinary afterthought. The grains are set aside. Those are far too ambitious for an invalid. Instead, it's the milky runoff that fills your mug. Rice water, the beverage of the barely living. To the Victorians, rice water was the pinnacle of medical cuisine. Easy to digest, gentle on the stomach, and free from the dangers of flavor, texture, or excitement. Doctors praised its soothing properties. Mothers swore by its effectiveness, and children regarded it with the dread usually reserved for cod liver oil or impromptu math lessons. If you were especially unlucky, your rice water might be served cold, the taste and texture now joined by the ghostly chill of forgotten leftovers. The logic, as always, was both simple and slightly suspect. Food for the recovering was supposed to do as little as possible. Rest the stomach, support the constitution, and above all, not cause a fuss. Rice water checked every box. It could be sipped by the spoonful, poured over a lump of bread, or, if your spirits flagged, spiked with a whisper of sugar, which everyone pretended was for medicinal purposes, and not just to mask the flavor of disappointment. The experience? Imagine drinking a cup of hope diluted with a gallon of resignation. The taste is faintly starchy, with a texture that hovers between barely there and should I chew this? It's the color of bathwater left over from washing a sack of potatoes, and just as inspiring. Every sip is a gentle reminder that you are, in fact, still alive. And that's probably enough for now. Rice water became the universal prescription for everything from post-surgical recovery to childhood diarrhea. If you were too sick to eat, you got rice water. If you were recovering from a stomach bug, you got more rice water. If you simply looked sad at breakfast, someone was already boiling the kettle. In the grand tradition of Victorian medicine, the worse you felt, the more rice water you were served. Until you began to suspect that your recovery was being measured not by your pulse, but by your willingness to drink another mug of starchy cloud. Some families tried to dress it up, adding a twist of lemon, a pinch of cinnamon, or a careful swirl of honey. But most stuck to tradition. Plain is best, the doctor insisted, as though flavor itself might interfere with the healing process. Meanwhile, the patient dreamed of stews, cakes, or anything with an actual personality. Of course, there was a kind of comfort in the ritual. Rice water was gentle, undemanding, and accompanied by the reassuring clatter of spoons and the quiet presence of family. You sipped, you napped, you waited for real food to return. And when, at last, your appetite returned and you were offered something solid, you knew you'd survived not just your illness, but the cure as well. So tonight, as you pour yourself a drink with actual flavor, raise a silent toast to rice water, the great Victorian ruse that healed with blandness, comforted with monotony, and proved, once and for all, that sometimes survival is just a matter of patience and an empty spoon. Did you know sugar was once a medicinal food, handed out for everything from headaches to heartbreaks? It's not that different from now, except The dentist's bills were higher, and so were the stakes. It's a chilly Victorian afternoon, and you're curled up on the fainting couch, suffering from what the doctor calls nerves and what your family suspects is just boredom. The room smells faintly of coal smoke and parlour flowers. But today there's a whiff of excitement. Someone's opened the sweet tin. With great ceremony, your mother presents you with a few sugar plums, dazzlingly pastel, dusted in a fine white snow of sweetness. Just the thing for your constitution, she says, as if she's delivering a miracle instead of a shortcut to your next toothache. For the Victorians, sugar wasn't just a treat, it was medicine, luxury, and status symbol all rolled into one. Confectionery therapy was very real. Got a headache? Have a sugar plum. Suffering heartbreak? Try a candied violet. The apothecary's shelves were lined not only with bottles of suspicious syrups, but also jars of sweetmeats, bonbons, and jellies, each one more enticing and expensive than the last. Sugar plums, by Victorian standards, weren't actually plums at all, but little orbs of hardened sugar, sometimes with a nut or a bit of spice at their core. Making them was a time-consuming art, layer upon layer of syrup carefully poured and dried, until the result was something magical, delicious, and, as it turned out, wildly hazardous to dental health. No matter. The risk was all part of the experience. You'd suck on a sugar plum for hours, feeling your spirits rise and your molars slowly surrender. Doctors prescribed sugar for nearly every emotional or physical malady. It was considered soothing to the nerves, invigorating to the spirits, and, for children, a guaranteed distraction from whatever actual medicine you were supposed to be taking. Even heartbreak, often diagnosed as melancholia or hysteria, was met with a recommendation to take more sweets, preferably with tea and a supportive audience. The message was clear: if life hurts, eat sugar and hope for the best. Of course, there was a darker side. Sugar was expensive, and being offered a candied fruit or a liqueur bonbon was a sign of both love and wealth. The poor made do with sugar syrup on bread, while the wealthy indulged in elaborate desserts shaped like swans, castles, or even, for the truly fortunate, actual fruit. Every bite was a tiny celebration of survival, a brief moment of sweetness in a world that ran mostly on salt, starch, and stern advice. But there was a price for all this confectionery comfort. Victorian dentists were a grim, necessary evil, lurking in chilly back rooms with tools that looked better suited to carpentry than medicine. Cavities were common, and a sore tooth could quickly spiral into a family crisis, followed, ironically, by a recommendation to suck on a licorice stick to take the edge off. You learned to savor your sugar plums while you could, knowing that the bill and the pain would come due. Despite the risks, sugar held a place of honor in the Victorian sickroom and social scene. It brightened the dullest day, soothed the sourest mood, and, for a brief shining moment, made you forget your worries until your next trip to the dentist or your next fit of melancholy. So tonight, if you find comfort in a late-night sweet, know you're in good company. The Victorians understood the power of sugar, both to heal and to harm. In the end, maybe that's all any medicine really is. A moment of sweetness, a little risk, and the hope that tomorrow will be just a bit brighter, and that your dentist never finds out, worried about catching the next plague, or just tired of looking pale in the gaslight. Victorians believed a squeeze of lemon juice with a dash of cayenne could purify the blood and boost immunity. You might feel the burn, but at least you can pretend your suffering is medicinal. It's a brisk morning in Victorian England, and the world outside your window is a study in grey. Grey fog, grey streets, grey faces. The city is full of coughs, sneezes, and people reading alarming articles about blood impurity in the newspaper. Your mother, always vigilant for the next health fad, is squeezing lemons with the determination of someone who knows citrus is expensive and status-enhancing. In the kitchen, a little bowl of fiery red cayenne pepper sits ominously on the table. Together, these ingredients are about to become your new health regimen, whether you like it or not. The prescription comes straight from your family's collection of home remedy books, sandwiched between instructions for goose grease rubs and walking briskly in circles. A squeeze of lemon, a generous sprinkle of cayenne, and a splash of hot water. Sometimes honey is added, if your mother is feeling kind, or if your last report card wasn't too disappointing. The mixture is poured into a delicate teacup and brought to your bedside, steaming and suspiciously bright in a world built on shades of beige. You stare at the potion, aware that its cheerful yellow glow and peppery flecks make it look far more exciting than it tastes. The first sip is a shock. Tart, electric, nose, tingling, with a slow, creeping burn that works its way from your lips to the back of your throat. Your eyes water. Your tongue protests. It's working, your mother beams. You can feel it purifying your blood. You are more convinced it's just purifying your will to live. Victorian logic was beautifully optimistic. If it hurts, it must be helping. Lemon juice brought the exotic promise of distant lands, the threat of scurvy banished with every mouth-puckering swallow. Cayenne pepper, meanwhile, was considered nature's little fire starter. It was said to stimulate the system, drive out impurities, and guard against chills. The more you coughed, sneezed, or broke out in a cold sweat, the more certain everyone was that you'd soon be the healthiest person on the block. Doctors sometimes prescribed this concoction for everything from faintness to general debility, a catch-all diagnosis that covered everything from actual illness to the existential dread of winter. Housewives swore by it, promising it could brighten the complexion and liven the spirits. Children, on the other hand, became experts in creative avoidance, hiding cups behind curtains, pouring doses into potted plants, or bribing the family dog for assistance. It wasn't all suffering, though. There was something comforting about the ritual, the clatter of spoons, the bright scent of lemon cutting through the usual fog of boiled cabbage and coal dust, the unspoken belief that somewhere in this glass, healing might be found, and in truth, there was a little science behind it. Vitamin C from the lemon, a bit of circulation, boosting capsaicin from the cayenne, and most importantly, the placebo power of being cared for. For those who endured, the benefits were celebrated. "You look so much better," relatives would say, admiring your watery eyes and flushed cheeks. "Your blood is surely pure now." Of course, the true reward was often relief. The knowledge that your morning glass of pain and punishment was over for the day, and that you'd survived another round of Victorian medicine with all your extremities intact. So tonight, as you sip your sleepy time tea or add a twist of lemon to your water, remember your ancestors, brave souls who fought off the scurvy, the plague, and the general greyness of life with nothing but citrus, pepper, and an unwavering faith in the power of suffering for health. May your own remedies be gentler, your days brighter, and your immunity only tested by things that actually taste good. Have you lost your appetite? Good news, because breakfast is a mushy heap of bran mash, recommended by Victorian doctors for digestive woes, melancholy, or just because your cook was out of ideas. Nothing gets the bowels moving like a meal that tastes like yesterday's newspaper. It's a bleak Victorian dawn. You're propped up in bed, head throbbing, stomach churning, and the household is tiptoeing around as if you're a particularly delicate vase. The doctor, all whiskers and self-importance, prescribes his favorite miracle, bran mash. The cook, who had secretly hoped for a nice, simple gruel day, trudges to the pantry to fetch the least exciting ingredient in the world, bran. Bran, for the uninitiated, is what's left after all the interesting parts of the wheat have been whisked away. It's the flaky, fibrous jacket, the culinary equivalent of a suit of armor, but, crucially, without any flavor, fun, or nutritional excitement. The cook boils it with water until it achieves the perfect consistency. Not quite solid, not quite liquid, just a sort of damp, sagging mound. Sometimes a splash of milk is added, sometimes a pinch of salt. But heaven forbid anyone be so bold as to use sugar. The result, bran mash. A dish that looks like it's already been through something and tastes like it never wants to go through it again. Victorian doctors swore by it. Bran mash was prescribed for the constipated, the melancholic, the languid, and anyone whose stomach dared to grumble in public. The logic was as unyielding as the mash itself. If it was bland, it must be good for you. If it was fibrous, it must sweep your insides clean. And if it tasted like boiled cardboard, well, you probably wouldn't be overeating, would you? The first spoonful is a study in anti-pleasure. It clings to the bowl, the spoon, and your tongue with equal determination. The taste? Like damp paper and mild regret, with a finish that can only be described as persistent. The texture is its main event. Soft yet gritty, managing to dry out your mouth while somehow making it wetter. Your appetite, already wounded, waves a tiny white flag, but your mother hovers nearby, insisting, "It's for your health, darling." She says this in the tone of someone who's never actually tasted the stuff herself. Still, bran mash did have one reliable effect. If you ate enough, things would, eventually, start moving. Victorian families tracked regularity with the same zeal modern families track screen time. There was an almost competitive pride in how quickly the bran mash did its work. "He's looking brighter already," a relative would chirp, as you quietly wondered if it was possible to disappear into the bedsheets. For the melancholy, bran mash was supposed to lift the spirits through the power of routine and the digestive equivalent of a broom. If you weren't cheered by the flavor, which, let's face it, was impossible, you were supposed to be cheered by the thought that your internal workings were being swept clean and set in perfect order. Doctors would nod approvingly, and mothers would tell friends at tea, "He's eating bran mash again." Such a relief. There were, of course, variations for the truly desperate. A few mashed prunes for sweetness, a swirl of molasses, or even a sprinkle of dried fruit. But these were seen as scandalous indulgences, liable to bring down the whole fragile edifice of Victorian health. So tonight, as you reach for a modern breakfast with taste, texture, and hope, spare a thought for your ancestors bravely spooning down bowls of mush in pursuit of wellness, regularity, and the faint hope of something tastier tomorrow. Because in the end, nothing says getting better like a meal. You'd only eat if you were really, really sick. Forget the pharmacist, just raid the garden. Dandelion wine was sipped as a tonic for liver complaints and general malaise. Sweet, floral, and slightly questionable, it was the kind of home remedy that started as medicine and ended as a garden party with regrets. It's early spring in Victorian England. The city is still waking from winter, and the countryside has erupted in a riot of yellow dandelions, those cheerful weeds that refuse to die, no matter how hard your neighbours try. For most, dandelions are a nuisance. But for your household, they're a miracle crop, a wild-growing pharmacy, just waiting to be picked, brewed, and poured. The logic is simple, in that uniquely Victorian way. If nature puts something right under your nose, It must be there for a reason. So out you go, basket in hand, to gather the freshest dandelion heads before the bees beat you to them. This is a family affair. Children picking, parents sorting, and at least one neighbor peering suspiciously over the fence, wondering if this is just eccentricity or the start of a cult. Back in the kitchen, the adventure begins. Dandelion heads are soaked, sugar is measured, lemons are sliced, and everything is dumped into a great crock with enough boiling water to scald your hopes and dreams. There's an air of scientific excitement as yeast is stirred in. Just a pinch, not too much, warns your grandmother, who still remembers the year the living room carpet was lost to an overzealous batch. Then the crock, it is covered, left to work its mysterious magic in the pantry while you all pray it doesn't explode. The wait is long and full of anticipation. You sneak peeks, sniff the air for signs of sweetness, and listen for the faintest fizzing sound. A few weeks later, the wine is strained, bottled, and lined up on the shelf like a row of liquid gold. It's officially ready for any health crisis, or, more likely, the next family gathering where someone wants to feel restored. When the time comes, a glass of dandelion wine is poured with great solemnity. The color is beautiful, sunshine in a glass. The smell is floral, grassy, and just the tiniest bit earthy. The first sip is surprisingly pleasant. Sweet, light, with a taste that hints at fields in bloom and the vague promise of adventure. It's delicious until the aftertaste hits and you remember you're essentially drinking weed juice with a side of yeast. Still, to Victorians, this was nothing short of a miracle. Dandelion wine was said to cleanse the liver, clear the blood, and chase away the blues. Feeling listless? Dandelion wine. Overindulged at supper? Dandelion wine. Slightly bored of the company? Another round of dandelion wine, and suddenly everyone's a poet, a philosopher, or an amateur botanist with grand theories about the healing powers of weeds. The line between medicine and party beverage quickly blurs. What starts as a tonic for malaise ends as a full-blown social event. The more you drink, the better you feel, until you don't. The next morning, with a head full of regret and a liver perhaps more taxed than cleansed, you reconsider the wisdom of home remedies, but only briefly. By afternoon, someone's bound to mention the virtues of another glass, just to steady the nerves. For all its questionable benefits, dandelion wine is a testament to Victorian resourcefulness and, let's be honest, optimism. When life gives you weeds, make wine. And if the medicine doesn't work, at least you'll have a good story and a garden full of empty stems. So tonight, as you drift off, raise an imaginary glass of dandelion wine to those who believed that a little sweetness, a little sunshine, and a pinch of hope could cure whatever ails you, even if it started as a weed and ended with a headache. Bad cough? Don't worry, Victorian wisdom has you covered. Just slap some raw onion between two hunks of stale bread and call it medicine. The only thing more potent than the health benefits is the breath you'll carry for days. It's lunchtime in a Victorian home, and the kitchen is a battleground of competing aromas, coal smoke, cabbage, and now, a sharp, eye-watering burst of onion. You're hunched at the table, wrapped in 3 shawls and coughing like you've been mining for a decade. The family physician has come and gone, recommending fresh air, prayer, and a diet as natural as possible. Naturally, your mother interprets this as a sign to make her specialty, the raw onion sandwich. The recipe is elegantly simple and, depending on your attitude toward onions, either inspired or mildly criminal. Take 1 sturdy loaf of yesterday's bread, the older the better, apparently. Slice it into 2 doorstop-sized pieces and cram as many rings of raw onion between them as gravity allows. If you're lucky, there might be a thin smear of butter, mostly for morale. Some families get fancy and add a dash of vinegar or salt. But for the true purist, it's just bread and onion, medicine in its most unfiltered form. You stare at your lunch, contemplating your choices. The onions glisten, promising both agony and, if your ancestors are to be believed, miraculous healing. Victorians were convinced that onions had near mystical powers. They purified the blood, cleared the lungs, and warded off pestilence. If a cough persisted, you ate more onions. If your breath cleared a room, that meant the medicine was working. The first bite is an experience you won't soon forget. The bread is tough, the onions are fierce, and your taste buds are instantly overwhelmed by a spicy, almost electric jolt. Your eyes water, your nose tingles, and for a brief moment, you forget all about your cough, mostly because you're too busy choking down another bite and wondering if you've lost the will to live or just the feeling in your tongue. Of course, the health benefits were largely anecdotal. Onions do have some antimicrobial properties, but Victorian claims were as much about faith as fact. If your lungs felt clearer, it was probably because you were now crying harder than you ever had over a Jane Austen novel. Still, there was a strange camaraderie in suffering through it together. Siblings made a game of who could finish their sandwich fastest. Parents promised extra treats to anyone who didn't make a face. Socially, the onion sandwich was complicated. Children learned early that bringing onion lunch to school was a gamble. Friends could be won or lost based on proximity. Kissing was out of the question for at least a week. The family dog eyed you with newfound suspicion. But in the sick room, the rules were different. No one cared about breath when survival, and possibly a little peace and quiet, was on the line. There were, of course, attempts to improve the experience. Some households layered their onions with cheese or cold meat, but purists frowned on such frivolities. The point was the onion and the suffering. Medicine, in the Victorian tradition, was supposed to hurt a little, if only to remind you that you were alive and well enough to complain. Yet, after the last mouthful, you'd find your cough easing, your sinuses clearing, and your spirits, eventually, lifting. If only because you knew the next meal couldn't possibly be worse. You'd sit back, breathing deeply, feeling oddly heroic. You'd survived another day, another Victorian remedy, and would live to terrify the dinner table with your breath and your stories. So next time you reach for cough drops or hot tea, think of your ancestors and their raw onion sandwiches. Proof that sometimes healing is just a matter of conviction, camaraderie, and a willingness to clear the room for your own good health. If you thought soup couldn't get any sadder, meet gelatin broth, a shimmering, vaguely meat-flavored goo pressed on the sick and elderly. It was the go-to food for anyone who couldn't chew, wouldn't chew, or just needed to experience disappointment in a bowl. It's a dreary Victorian afternoon. You've been confined to bed, surrounded by a small army of pillows and the faint hope that tomorrow's meal might involve actual texture. The house is thick with the aroma of simmering bones, a scent that lands somewhere between Sunday dinner and a long-neglected shoe. The doctor has visited and pronounced that what you need isn't rest or fruit, or perhaps even hope. No, your prescription is gelatin broth, a dish so unassuming it can sneak up on you while you're sleeping and still leave you underwhelmed. The process begins in the kitchen, where someone has the job of boiling animal bones for hours on end, skimming off the mysterious froth that rises to the top. A few sad vegetables might be tossed in, more for show than for substance, and the whole concoction is strained until what's left is a pale, wobbly liquid that glistens in the bowl like a nervous ghost. The broth is poured into a shallow dish and left to set, transforming slowly and with great reluctance into something halfway between soup and dessert and fully committed to being neither. The result? A quivering slab of protein and regret. It doesn't quite slosh, but it doesn't quite stay put either. You poke it with your spoon and it shudders, as if protesting its own existence. The first mouthful is a study in sensory ambiguity: cool, slippery, slightly sticky, and carrying a faint memory of beef or chicken if you squint and use your imagination. It is not bad, exactly, but nor is it comforting. Gelatin broth's greatest trick is convincing you to expect nothing and then still managing to deliver less. For Victorians, though, this was medicine at its finest. Gelatin was thought to be restorative, easy to digest, packed with nourishment, and gentle enough for the most fragile of constitutions. If you were recovering from surgery, dental work, or a bad case of ennui, gelatin broth was delivered to your bedside with the confidence of someone convinced they'd invented the fountain of youth. Invalids sipped it, spoon by spoon, each taste both reassuringly bland and quietly infuriating. Children, of course, saw right through it. You could try to jazz it up, add a sprinkle of parsley, maybe even a splash of sherry, but no amount of culinary camouflage could mask the essential truth. Gelatin broth was just meat-flavored gel. Oh, and nobody, anywhere, had ever asked for that. Elders would assure you that it builds you up, while quietly reaching for a biscuit to chase away the flavor. The broth wasn't just for the bedridden. Anyone who showed even the slightest hint of weakness, a cough, a limp, or an ill-timed yawn, risked finding a bowl of gelatinous broth at their place come mealtime. It was the universal fallback, the edible equivalent of wrapping someone in a scratchy blanket and telling them to count their blessings. Medical journals of the time waxed poetic about its curative power. But the real victory was psychological. A bowl of gelatin broth said, "You're unwell, but not so unwell as to deserve flavor." It was food as gentle scolding, nourishment as gentle trolling. So tonight, as you tuck yourself in, think of the countless Victorians who sipped and slurped their way to health with a wobble and a sigh. May your own recovery foods be warmer, tastier, and less committed to being both everywhere and nowhere at once. And if you ever find yourself staring down a bowl of wobbling, shimmering broth, remember, wellness comes in many forms, and sometimes it just wobbles. So tonight, as you drift off in the warm glow of your LED lamp, wrapped in clean sheets, with a fridge full of food that won't try to cure you or quietly kill you, maybe spare a thought for your Victorian ancestors, the ones who faced every ache, sniffle, or bout of mysterious malaise armed with nothing but beef tea, cod liver oil, and the eternal optimism that a new pudding might be the answer to tuberculosis. It's hard not to respect their stubborn hope, their willingness to try anything, however slimy, bitter, or suspiciously alcoholic, just to feel a little better. They didn't have ibuprofen, flu shots, or even much in the way of accurate medical advice, but they had cupboards stuffed with arrowroot biscuits, bedrooms that smelled like goose grease, and a family doctor who believed a glass of warm brandy could solve absolutely everything. In the face of suffering, they just doubled down on the desserts. Sure, it was a little misguided. Sometimes it was a lot misguided. But there's something beautifully human about the whole endeavor, the endless faith that wellness could be boiled, baked, or poured into a glass and served before bedtime. So, as you sink into your mattress, free of prunes, plasters, and mandatory suet pudding, take a moment to thank the universe for modern medicine, clean water, and a world where prescribed sugar plums are just a holiday treat, not a health strategy. Because history may be baffling, gross, and frequently hilarious, but it's also proof that people will always try, hope, and yes, eat their way out of a crisis, even if it means washing down a raw egg flip with a toast water chaser. Rest easy, knowing you don't have to. Good night.